Welcome to the Barcelona Podcast, episode 189, brought to you by the Blue Wire Podcast Network and sponsored betonline.ag. It's Unmissable Opinions, brought to you by the most influential voices in the FC Barcelona community. I'm Ben Hilton, and joining me, as always, is Francesc Tomas. Before we get to some special guests later, but again, for now, it's just Francesc and I. How's it going?
Hola, Gules. Going well. As I've been saying for the last 5 weeks, a little bit boring. Being at home is not, it is good from a family perspective, but, it is about time that this nightmare passed and we can actually go back to normal life. I know the podcast is listened to around the world, so I don't know what part of the curve you're in. But, if you're at the peak, I'm really sorry about what's going on, and hopefully better times are coming. If the peak is gone, then congrats. Hopefully you're closer to normal life. And if it hasn't really hit you where you are, just be very mindful, be very careful, and obviously take advice and an example from what's happened around the world to see what's coming. What a nightmare.
Yeah, this week, one of our listeners whose name, I'm not going to say whether or not he wants it to be real or not, but he lost his wife this week. And I really, for those who know who he is, listen to our podcast. We've always appreciated his support. But if you know who I'm talking about, give your love, give your support on Twitter, on social media, because these are people that you know now. And yeah, it's certainly a nightmare situation, Francesc, for sure. So with all that said, we have avoided talking about current events ever since football stopped because we don't know what kind of money clubs will be working with, what the transfer window will look like. And it also always feels a little tone deaf. While so much related to the pandemic was unknown, still is unknown. We still don't know much of anything, but as a club and media has begun to respond to certain things, we figured we should too, just because the club is starting to have conversations about certain players and the funds that are going to be available for those players. So that's why today it's just Francesc and I. Before we get to our special guests, we're going to be trying to figure out what we would be willing to give up for Lautaro Martínez. And I say this because 111 million euros is the release clause that goes into effect in July, because the player has a contract till 2023. And Inter Milan really has no reason to sell. So they might ask for that price of 111 million euros, but they also might be lacking funds for their own transfer activity that they're going to need help with. So we're not sure where we're going to be on that side. But with the standard that the market may have, Bartomeu and the media have both said that transfer swaps and a movement of players could make the transfer market look different. And much different, because of players, in a way that players usually don't move and get swapped for one another. You see it occasionally, and I think it's, Francesc, always mentioned in the media that players could be swapped, but those swap deals very, very, very rarely do they occur, where you have one player going one way for another, because weekly wages and transfer money and all the different things involved, it usually doesn't happen. But Francesc, I guess the question we start with here is, who or what is your price for Lautaro Martínez?
Well, the price is 111 million euros, as the Inter president has pretty much made very clear. About what you mentioned about the swaps, the last one I really remember that was significant was Zlatan Ibrahimovic and Samuel Eto'o. I think it was around 2009, 2010. And there was a lot of money put on top of that, so that we gave up Samuel Eto'o and paid an insane amount of money to get Zlatan. And then, within a year and a bit, he was on his way out. So this situation is different. I mean, from what I'm reading in the Catalan media and listening to in the Catalan radio, it seems to be all about secondary players from the Barca perspective that could go to Inter. The latest that I've read today is that it seems to be Nelson Semedo and Carlos Alaña seem to be the two that Inter would be interested in. I mean, traditionally, over the last 3-4 months, Arturo Vidal and Ivan Rakitic have been included in the conversation, but it really does look like Rakitic wants to go back to Sevilla. We signed him from Sevilla around 5-6 years ago now, paying 21 million euros, so that seems to be the fee that Sevilla are prepared to pay us to get him back. As I wrote in the Facebook group the other day, I think it is fair that, considering everything Rakitic has given to the club over the years, especially in his first 1 and 2 years, I think it's fair that he goes back to Sevilla if that's his wish for the same amount. I think that's good business from our perspective. Arturo Vidal has a lot of suitors all around the world, really, particularly from Italy. But obviously, and I think we're going to be talking about this a lot more in coming weeks, with the Saudi takeover from Newcastle, there is a chance that Arturo Vidal actually ends up in the Premier League and obviously Northern England with Newcastle United. Obviously, that's still a developing story, but I've heard a couple of things coming from there as well. So I think Arturo Vidal, given his name, given his pedigree and given his experience, there is more of a chance that he's got more suitors than the other two. Nelson Semedo and Carlos Alagna, obviously, they're not key players at Barca. I mean, Carlos Alagna has gone up on loan. I do to Betis. I do understand that Setien wants him back, and Setien was very clear in an interview this week that he wouldn't have allowed him to go if it was up to him. But obviously the player, after having been promised by Valverde time and time again, he was going to be important and then featuring in 2-3 games over the last 20-25, then obviously the guy just wanted out. Setien's arrival could have changed that, but obviously, we cannot really live life on what ifs. And, guess what's happened? The pandemic has changed everything around the world, and he's only played 2-3 games at Betis, and, the season could potentially be over. So Alagna could actually return to Barca, having only played 3 or 4 matches away from the Camp Nou. If he wanted, I'm pretty sure Betis will want another loan, another season. But if he's going to be shipped to Inter to get Lautaro back, I think that probably would be a good deal for us. I don't like giving away La Masia talent, and obviously the latest La Masia talent that could make the first team and the most sort of safe option, together with Ricky Puig, which, to be honest, he's done next to nothing at first team level yet, seems to be Carlos Alagna. But the situation in the last 2 months with this pandemic has put everything upside down. So I wouldn't see giving up Alagna to bring Lautaro Martínez as an insane proposition from Inter. I think it would make sense. And, the guy is just 21, 22. So when he's 26, 27, we may be able to buy him back if he really has exploded in Italy, which could potentially happen. As to Nelson Semedo going, I think Nelson Semedo is our best right back from a defensive perspective. But I also do know that Sergio Roberto has improved defensively over the years, and that Roberto moving forward seems to be the most efficient combinative approach. I think Semedo is more explosive. But, if giving up Alagna and Semedo bring you a world-class player in Lautaro, who obviously is Argentinian, already knows Leo Messi really well, I think that's a no-brainer, really. I'm assuming Inter would like some more millions to go along the package. But to be honest, if that's the deal, I would definitely take it.
Well, yeah, I think we're starting with talking about Rakitic and Vidal. You have 2 players over 30, and you don't really have a lot of negotiating power in offloading those players. And we've known that for quite some time. You could tell in January that phone calls were certainly made about those 2. And with the way that the season shook out and the way that Setien kind of came into a place where Alagna was loaned out, where Ricky Puig still wasn't going to get any ability to get into the first team. And Setien has even come out this week, and I think some of his words have been taken out of context a little bit too, about how none of the youngsters have really impressed him. He's been impressed by Alex Callado, it's seemingly more than Ricky Puig, and now Ricky Puig, could be on his way on loan to Real Betis. But I think all of that also is just being drummed up in a time where there isn't much other news going on. To the Nelson Semedo point, I think it's really interesting because if Semedo were to leave, then Barcelona are obviously desperate for whether it is Sergio Roberto they trust as the starting right back once again. You still need a B option. Or for Roberto and Semedo, it's always been 1A and 1B. So you really need basically a starter at right back. And is it that Barca believe that they could get Emerson quickly? Because I've liked him as an attacking right back. I think he has, when pressured to do some defensive work, I think he can do those things. But I also think that now you're also talking about a center back that is a little more mobile than Piqué. And you also wonder about the health of Umtiti, who this week said that he wants to stay at the club. So what we're getting to here is that a Lautaro deal, because I think for now the club, we can put Neymar out of our minds for at least a few more weeks, because how much he's going to cost us doesn't seem to match up with what's going to happen with the market due to the pandemic. But when it comes to Lautaro Martínez, there is a domino effect that if you offload him for other players or get rid of him for other players, then you're going to have to cover those spots. Because I want to remind you that there were just 14 first-team players along with Ansu Fati who were floating around the first team at the end of this season. There's so few bodies, right? And even if you say a name like, oh, we should sell Ousmane Dembélé, well, then someone has to be brought in to replace him, right? Or, well, Trincao is obviously on the way as well. I want to mention that as well. But so Trincao is on the way, but then you speak about, well, if Antoine Griezmann, try to throw him into some kind of deal as well, but he seems to be a guy that's going to want to settle. The reason I mention Griezmann here too is because I feel like with Lautaro, part of my fear is that, like in any saga, players get overrated, and I feel like Lautaro is getting to that point, and certainly will get there if Barca lose a deal. Because I want to look at some of what Lautaro, what he is at Inter, and kind of what that might fit in at Barcelona. Just looking at his expected goals this year compared to Luis Suarez, a .68 expected goals for Luis Suarez, .61 for Lautaro Martínez. So even in Inter's situation where he and Lukaku almost share the responsibilities of putting the ball in the back of the net, it was still less than the expected goals of Suarez. But that said, Martinez does not play with Lionel Messi, and Messi sets up Suarez a ton. So you can say it like that. Lautaro does take more opportunities, 4.46 shots per game compared to 3.66 from Suarez, as well as more touches in the box. He's dispossessed a little bit more. The one I really like here, though, is that his aerial duels or aerial wins for Lautaro, 0.97 per match compared to 0.28 for Suarez. So he's a little bit more of a threat in the aerial sense of things. As well as successful dribbles, 1.77 to 1.41 for Suarez. And most importantly, I think here, the pressure regains, which is an interesting stat that I'm not going to get into exactly what it breaks down to, but 4.89 for 2.61. And this is the real pro. This is where I don't think Lautaro Martinez is going to be overrated, because his pressing ability is going to be paramount moving forward for Barcelona. That's one of the main reasons you're getting him, to bring pressing pressure up top. He is an athlete, and he is somebody who can put the ball in the back of the net when put in opportunities on the foot of Messi and hopefully of Griezmann, Dembele, and whoever might be around him. Even Coutinho could return. The issues here, though, Francesc, that I would have with Lautaro Martinez, but I think this takes more into account patience with the player. So let's put it this way. I think Lautaro Martinez is still the right bet for this year, but you're going to have to understand it's going to take probably a year. Think about Griezmann. It's going to take about a year for him to get assimilated to the way Barca play, because his role for Inter at the moment is dropping in deep and facilitating, and you're going to have similar problems with Messi in those spaces that you had with Griezmann and Coutinho. Lautaro Martinez is going to have to change the way he plays. Is he a number 9? Yes, he's 22 years old. He can certainly learn and certainly change. But if he's going to be dropping in and facilitating as well, along with Messi, and almost rotating in those spots, you're going to put more pressure on the fullbacks if he's going to play in the middle. So if you get rid of Nelson Semedo for Lautaro Martinez, defensively, you're going to have to bring in a fullback that might be able to defend a little bit. Again, Jordi Alba's not getting any younger, and they're thinking about offloading to Junior Firpo. There are rumors of that as well. So then the big question mark comes to the fullback. And Francesc, I would say before you respond to this, let's hit a break, and then we're going to get your response, and then we're going to hear from our special guest. All right, Francesc, I gave you a whole earful about Lautaro Martinez before that break. So how did it shake out for you as where he could fit for Barcelona? How much would Barca be willing to pay for the patience of a player that might not fit in right away, but honestly, surely be the best bet for a long term?
Well, yeah, I think that the last part of what you just mentioned is the key. He's a long-term solution. You were comparing Luis Suarez to Lautaro. I don't think many players would actually compare to Luis Suarez ever, because he's one of the best goal scorers that the world football has ever seen.
For sure.
Certainly in the last 10 years. And even at 32, 33 years old that he is now, I think that those stats that you mentioned are remarkable. Obviously he plays at Barca, meaning that Barca normally in a normal world would score many more goals than Inter Milan do, even if they're in the Serie A. Italian football is normally more defensive as well, and the ratio per game seems to be, in my experience, lower than it is in La Liga. I haven't looked at the stats this season, but it's normally like that. So I would say that if Lautaro has a production at Inter, and I do take the point that he's one of the two main strikers, but if his production at Inter is on par with Luis Suarez, I think that speaks for itself. Also, the addition of Lautaro would spur Luis Suarez on. He said it himself. He said that if he had someone that basically would be challenging for his position, that would help him to move that step further. And I think that the timelines of Luis Suarez and Lautaro actually do align, because Luis Suarez in 1, 2, 3 years, probably 2 years, should really be on his way out, unless he becomes a super substitute in the last 20, 30 minutes. And I think Lautaro could, do that shift with him in the same way that Juli did with the young Messi at the time. So I don't really see that as a problem. Now, do you give up Griezmann to bring Lautaro? Do you give up Dembele to bring Lautaro? Do you give up even Coutinho? Well, given the situation of the pandemic around the world, and obviously, and I have not seen this confirmed, but everything indicates that transfers should really decrease unless, Newcastle United with a new influx of money explodes the market, which quite likely will happen as well. I do think that Barca are going to need the money from either the sale of Dembele or Coutinho. I think Coutinho is the first one on his way out, really, because he's got a great market, especially in the Premiership, clearly, because, he came from Liverpool before and he was fairly good then. And I do think that all of the money that could be made out of sales, potential sales, is going to help Barca fill in the gaps, especially if they need to give up important pieces to bring Lautaro to the Camp Nou.
Yeah, I think an important part of Coutinho, too, is looking at what he's done at Bayern Munich. He's been fine at Bayern. He has not been so amazing that Bayern want to buy him. Also, Bayern have a way of taking the best young German talents and getting them to want to play for Bayern Munich because they win every Bundesliga. So that's also helpful why Coutinho, Bayern are not a team that's willing to shell out cash, even though they're one of the top sides in the world. Coutinho also has, you mentioned the Premier League, he still has that marketability. One of the big reasons Barca wanted him, I think even more so than probably his talent, is that because he's Brazilian, there is a lot of money you make on the back end through shirt sales and market deals and all these different things that Brazilian players seem to attract a lot of money on the non-football side of things. So yeah, I think that's a good place to leave it for now, Francesc, with this Lautaro Martínez debate and argument. It's not really much of a debate. I think Kool-Aid and everyone agrees, even the club agrees that this is the player that they want. I think not unlike a Frankie de Jong situation where the timeline just works out well, that Lautaro, as you said, he's 22, he's going to be reaching his peak just as Suarez, and I don't foresee that renaissance coming just because of the knees, not even about his playing ability, because you're right, he's one of the top strikers ever, and I think when football were to, apparently this week again, the news has been that the Champions League is nearing the end of August as a time that they're trying to, get in some of those knockout matches. And it seems like Luis Suarez, Barca is an older team, so it might take them a little bit longer time to get fit. And we've seen, whether it was a 1999 NBA lockout, older teams tend to struggle when you kind of throw them right back into the fire. It's the younger players, the younger, fitter players in their early 20s and teams that are built like that wind up hitting the ground running, just kind of catch fire at the right time. It is really like a World Cup or a tournament like that. And so older teams, like, again, with Piqué and Suarez and what have you, or Busquets, that players who are over the age of 30, Jordi Alba, it might take them a little time to get where they need to go. However, Luis Suarez is a big game player, and with Suarez back in tow, whenever football comes back for Barcelona, is a good place to be. So we're in a good place in this podcast because we are going to be speaking to our special guest from the NYC Penya in just a sec. But Francesc, that's it for you today. Thanks so much, buddy.
Forza.
Now time for our special guest. For the second half of the show, I've got with me the president of the local New York City Penya, Jordi, and the vice president, Rob, again from the local NYC Penya, and the official partner of the Barcelona podcast as well. I should mention, they have been so kind to join the show to give a quick update on the situation with the Penyas, as well as the New York Kicks coronavirus initiative that is currently going on. So Jordi, Rob, I'll let you answer this first. How you guys holding up?
We're doing well. Staying indoors, working from home. That part has been a little bit of a challenge with, because I am an educator, so teaching from home. Then I have a 10-month-old who wants to join. She also wants to be a teacher. So that part's been a challenge, but thankfully we're all doing well. As long as everyone stays home, we should definitely get through this.
Yeah. So thanks so much for having us on, Dan. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. And in these days when there's no football, it seems somewhat foreign, but we're really happy to hear your voice and be back with the podcast. Yeah, we're holding on. It's everybody. We've all had either friends or family members that have been affected by COVID. Unfortunately, here in New York City, that's just the reality of what we're going through. We are hoping that as much as possible, just like Rob said, people stay safe and healthy. And can't wait for us to come out of this in a way that is much more positive than right now. So hopefully football can help us on the way.
Yeah, well, speaking of positive, though, and for all that we can do from inside our homes, the Penyas, and in particular the Penyas in New York City, have an initiative called the New York Kicks Coronavirus. And if you guys just want to explain what that is, I'll put the links down in the description. People can check that out, help out any way they can as well. So what is the New York Kicks Coronavirus Initiative?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. It's an initiative that arose rather spontaneously, actually, from different presidents of supporters groups, fans groups in the city that had been wanting to figure out something that we could do together to show unison, to show that we're New Yorkers, to show that we want to tackle this difficult situation in the way that we most positively can. And this was back almost 3 weeks ago that we talked about it, and things were getting worse here in New York City. So we decided that the one target that we could try to hit was to try to help out the best we could using our resources with the lack of materials and different types of supplies and protective gear for our healthcare professionals. So we all very quickly agreed. There's about, I think the latest count is 36 Peñas or 36 supporters clubs that have come together from La Liga. We have obviously Football Club Barcelona, but Betis and Atleti Madrid, also Valencia have come together. Then there are also teams from other leagues, such as Roma. Roma's been critical in putting this together too at a practical level. So we want to thank them for that. English teams, PSG as well. So we came together very quickly over a weekend and agreed that we would reach out to all of our membership and supporters to try to get them to fund a nonprofit that works directly with healthcare professionals in the public hospitals here in New York City. And in a matter of, we went live 2 Tuesdays ago, and within 24 hours, we'd already raised, I think it was close to $6,000. At latest count, we're up to $36,000 that we've raised altogether, which makes us very happy, as you might imagine, to be able to contribute in what way we can. Obviously, that's not the biggest chunk of money, but I think that one thing that we've seen is that across New York, different types of volunteer groups are coming together, and it makes us feel proud to be part of that, a little part of it anyway.
Yeah, and I think it is a reminder that there is not only a Barcelona community, which I think online and when the season's going on and everyone has their different lives, it feels like everyone is so separate. But not only are you reminded that that is what a Penya is. It is a community of people that follow one team in one location, sure, but the football family exists, and that is what's happening, is that it's not even just football. It's the whole world is combating this one thing as one unit, and certainly any little bit helps in this fight. And again, a reminder that these are communities. And another one of the communities that got together, I just want to get some of the information from the conference that was held online from the presidents of the Americas, the different Peñas, that being the Barcelona Peñas, throughout the Americas. Just I want to check in and how the plan there and some of the information that was garnered there that you can explain about combating COVID-19.
Yeah, so basically a few days ago, all of the presidents from, most of the presidents from different Peñas across the Americas, North, South, Central, Caribbean, got together in a Zoom meeting, and we discussed, along with Josep Maria Barnils, the director of FC Barcelona, who is in charge of international Peñas. We discussed where everybody was, what type of situation they were enduring in their own cities. And at the same time, we discussed actions that each Peña is taking to try to help out, or to help out either locally, as we have been trying to do here in New York City, or even just reaching out to their members to try to make sure everybody's okay.
A reminder that there are communities here. Now, I want to mention, before all of this kind of went away, and we haven't been able to talk to both you, Jordi and Rob, in a while, but before this all went down and we had an El Clasico a few weeks prior to that, I just want to take you back to one of the last times where the communities were together. What happened at the New York version of the mini El Clasico played between the two Penya teams this year?
Well, unlike our season, which has been a roller coaster, we were the garbage truck. So we got together the Friday before the mini Clasico, which has become a little tradition now. The two clubs got together. So we got together with the Madrid supporters, and both teams for the supporters clubs got together in Chelsea to have our little mini Clasico. And like I mentioned before, we were the garbage truck. We went in there and took care of business and left. We won the game, and then we had what they called el tercer tiempo, which Jordi could tell you a little bit more about that.
Yeah, tercer tiempo is a tradition, an old tradition in not just Spanish soccer, but across, I think also in England, I think is maybe where it even started, where you have it's a tradition in rugby as well, where you have, after the game, you get together, the two teams get together for drinks, and they call that the third half. So, Rob will tell us about what actually happened, because it seems it was a very interesting get-together.
So both teams got together, and we had a nice evening. We got together, put rivalries aside. Upper 90, which sponsored the event, raffled off some jerseys. Both teams, they were able to come together, talk about the game. And thankfully, our team was able to carry the trophy out of the bar at the end of the night. We have a trophy kind of like the Stanley Cup. So the winner of each, it's one trophy, and the winner of the game gets to keep it until the next game.
And a reminder, too, that you can go on the Barcelona Podcast YouTube channel page. You can see what happened at last year's match. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get to this year's, but that's 2-game winning streak, if I'm not mistaken, for the New York City Barcelona Penya. So there is a little bit of foot skills there where there with the Barcelona Penya.
Indeed, Dan. And I just want to remind the listeners that it's 2 games out of 2. So we have a perfect record against the Real Madrid Penya. I'm quite proud of that.
And now, unfortunately, though, Barcelona, obviously in El Clasico, this latest El Clasico, weren't able to get that result. But, Jordi, you did make an appearance on the El Clasico preview show. So I would say, not to toot your own horn too much, but what's the difference between featuring on the Barcelona podcast or actually featuring on FC Barcelona's El Clasico preview show?
It's actually a much more pleasant experience to talk to you, Dan. They've got so many people behind their production team is quite excitable and at times tense, and it kind of transmits to you. If you're not ready at the right moment and don't seem to be informed on what they're going to ask you, they get a little nervous. But so this is much more relaxed. And that said, though, it was a lot of fun. It's always good to promote our Penya internationally, especially when it comes to FC Barcelona TV. We are very proud to have been on there, and we really appreciate them collaborating with us. I think that FC Barcelona as a club and also their fans have always had a special place in our heart for New York City fans. We've always gotten very well along together, and we're very proud to be part of this bigger family.
Yeah, and just speak to your Penya a little bit, as a member myself, oddly enough, that the New York City Penya, and I think LA works in the same way, that they are quite interesting locations simply because New York and LA, you have a lot of people passing through in ways that a lot of the other, especially North America Peñas that I speak to or am in contact with and know people at, you have a lot of the same core people at some of those other Peñas. But in New York City, 60% or 50% of the people visiting the Peña might just, again, be passing through New York City on their way through travels, or they just discovered the Peña and they wind up not coming back as much as, you try to keep people in. But it winds up just being a lot of different faces and a different atmosphere each and every game. It's not just the same core group of people. So before I let you guys go, though, I want to get your, and then this is the unfortunate part of it, if the 2019-20 season has come to an end, and it looks like things, I don't know, again, we know nothing, so at this point, we're still going to say it's 50-50 where the season would end. I guess they would say Barca are champions, at least of the Liga, and Champions League, who knows what would happen there. But I want to, if this is the final result or the final ending to the 2019-2020 season, I just want to get both your thoughts. Rob, you go first.
Well, I will tell you the truth. I will be extremely relieved. This season has been a total roller coaster. At times, it looked like we just weren't ready to play. And at times, we looked like the most dominant team in the league. So I will be completely relieved. I know some people have said it's not fair. They should finish the season. But at the end of the day, we are on top. So why not? I'll still take the championship.
Yeah, I tend to agree with Rob. It has been a roller coaster season. At the same time, though, there is talk that maybe at the end of the summer they'll wrap up the league in sort of a quick manner. We'll see. If not, I would definitely I wouldn't mind the league ending right now because at least it would seem to me to be logical that we get the trophy because we are leaders. At the same time, there might be also an extra bonus added to it. Because if it did end right now, we might see Espanyol go down to second division, which would not be a bad thing.
Right. And interestingly enough, as much as people want to put an asterisk on the end of it, you look back through not only Spanish history, but the way the world works, just like with coronavirus, what's happening big picture in the world, it sometimes does bleed over into what's happening in football. And so this would not be the only championship in at least Spanish football history that has a little bit of an asterisk next to it.
Exactly. And I think you bring up a really interesting point because in the past, there have been leagues that have been cut shorter or different than normal. And those asterisks are placed there So it would be unfortunate if that asterisk was added, but at the same time, there is a fairness, I think, to understanding that we have been competing, even though as Barca fans, we're not totally happy with how the season went. The reality is that at this point, we're leaders. Some people are even joking around that it's been well over a month that Barca has been leading the league now since they retook the lead. And so, Setien is doing quite well. Of course, no been played. But yeah, I think that there's a logic to making this be the end of the season. If we're going to end it, then the way we stand right now should be what goes down as the official end of it.
Well, Jordi, Rob, I want to thank you guys so much for joining me on the show, talking about the New York Kicks coronavirus initiative. And I want to, again, tell you guys and everybody involved at any Penya to continue to stay safe. And I want to thank you again so much for coming on.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us, Dan. It's always a pleasure. And thanks for promoting Kick Coronavirus. We're very passionate about it.
And thanks to you, the listeners, for tuning in again to another edition of the Barcelona Podcast. You can tap in your app, check out the show notes to subscribe. You can find us on social media too. We're on Twitter at the Barcelona Pod or at HiltonD13 for me. On Instagram at the Barcelona Pod. Our closed Facebook group is tbpod.link/group. Deeper dives, discussions, all that. Also on Patreon. Even though we're not making the quick take match reviews for the time being, you continue to help us make these shows at tbpod.link/Patreon. Again, I cannot say thank you enough that the Patreon amount has actually gone up since this all happened, just to help out the podcast, and I'm so appreciative of those who've helped out there. We're also on YouTube at the Barcelona Podcast. In this trying time, as all we can do is look back at the past, the Barcelona Podcast YouTube channel, as well as this podcast here, obviously, is the place to be. So check us out there. Hit that subscription button. Give us some likes on some videos. It really helps out. Finally, I want to remind you, down in the description is the New York Kicks Coronavirus Initiative link that we discussed with Jordi and Rob. So help out down there as well. It goes right to the healthcare workers in the New York City area. So if you are in the greater New York City area or have ties to New York City, again, just hit that link and help them out there. So thanks so much again for listening to the Barcelona Podcast. Until next time, we'll talk to you soon, and Forza Barca.